Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, pressure on Hamas from all sides as the U.S. undertakes its own talks.
Israel is ramping up pressure on Hamas to release the remaining hostages. They're cutting off electricity to Gaza and making plans to resume the fighting.
Meanwhile, in Syria, human rights groups accuse the new regime of a massacre against civilians. More than 1,000 people have been killed in recent days. Julie Stahl has that story.
Reports of 2,000 to 3,000, and it's increasing every couple of hours. And we're seeing images and speaking to people on the ground that are just saying the bodies are piled up in the streets.
In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio condemned what he called radical Islamist terrorists who murdered people in recent days, saying the U.S. stands with ethnic minorities, including Christian, Druze, Alawite, and Kurdish communities. As trouble mounts for its northern neighbor, Israel is increasing the pressure on Hamas to release the remaining 59 hostages. It's cut off electricity it supplies to Gaza and is considering cutting off water. Also, the IDF is drawing up new war plans if Hamas doesn't free the hostages, lay down its arms, and give up governing in Gaza.
We will employ all the tools available to us so that all the hostages will return, and we will ensure that Hamas won't be in Gaza on the day after.
Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, the ceasefire is over. Fighting resumes as Israel strikes Hamas targets inside Gaza. And the U.S. hits the Houthis in Yemen. And President Trump issues a stern warning to Iran.
Well, it's back to wartime. Early Tuesday morning, Israeli warplanes began striking Hamas targets inside Gaza. This came on the heels of the U.S. warplanes pounding of Houthi rebel targets in Yemen over the weekend. The Trump administration also warned Iran to stop funding their proxy army or suffer the consequences. Here's the latest.
Dozens of U.S. airstrikes and missile strikes on Houthi targets over the weekend in Yemen left at least 50 people dead, the rebels claim. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says Houthi leaders are among the dead.
This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out.
The attacks came after the Houthis warned they're about to start hitting ships in the Red Sea and other nearby waters again. Since the start of the war in Gaza, the Houthis have disrupted global shipping and cost billions of dollars with attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. They've also targeted U.S. warships. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Fox News.
4 months ago, when we sent a ship through, it was shot at 17 times. Ships haven't been able to go through for over a year without being shot at. Freedom of navigation is basic. It's a core national interest.
On Truth Social, President Trump declared, "No terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing the waterways of the world." Trump also warned Iran to stop backing the Houthis, writing, "Beware, because America will hold you fully accountable, and we won't be nice about it."
The attacks lit up the night sky over Gaza with dozens of explosions. Israel says it's killed a number of Hamas leaders. Hamas claims hundreds of Gazans have been killed and wounded. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave the order overnight, stating the aim is to achieve the war's objectives, including the release of all of our hostages, both the living and the fallen. The cabinet approved the decision after Hamas repeatedly refused to release the hostages and rejected proposals presented by President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and other mediators.
What we have seen them do is prepare for a terror attack against our troops in Gaza, but more importantly, against our civilians in the communities outside of Gaza and the Western Negev. What we did is we took a preemptive strike on those terrorists, specifically those commanders, and on terror targets, removing those threats, and basically saying we will not accept this.
President Trump was informed of the plan beforehand.
The Trump administration and the White House were consulted by the Israelis on their attacks in Gaza tonight. And as President Trump has made it clear, Hamas the Houthis, Iran, all those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America, will see a price to pay.
The attacks now dramatically change the situation between Israel and Hamas after several weeks of ceasefire and negotiations. The two sides' bottom line demands are contradictory. Israel insists the war can't permanently end till Hamas frees the hostages, disarms, and gives up governing Gaza. Hamas refuses to lay its arms and give up power. It says it won't release the hostages till Israel ends the war and withdraws its troops. Hamas is now issuing threats against the captives, saying in a statement that ending the ceasefire is, quote, exposing the hostages in Gaza to an unknown fate. However, the hostages are Hamas's only real bargaining chip, and if they're all killed, there'll be nothing left to keep the IDF from going all out to destroy the terror group. All this comes as the U.S. continues strikes at Houthi targets in Yemen to end their attacks on shipping in the region.
Today, the operation continues, and it will continue in the coming days until we achieve the President's objectives.
On Tuesday, the IDF threatened to intensify its bombing of targets in Gaza if Hamas doesn't come back to the, quote, genuine negotiating table. And as this conflict disintegrates back into turmoil, we are joined by IDF Major Elliot Chodoff to get the breaking news directly from the ground. Elliot, what can you tell us about the deteriorating situation in Gaza?
Last night, it's evening here, so I'm talking about Monday night, our time. The Israeli Air Force struck dozens of targets in Gaza, taking out, according to Hamas numbers, killing some 300 people, and most importantly, 6 or 7 or 8 leaders of Hamas in Gaza. Also, rocket launching sites, arms depots, entrances to tunnels. In other words, military targets. And you know, when Hamas says 300 people, they say, you know, they were all women and children. My guess is that there weren't too many women and children in the mix. It was a surprise strike, which means it caught Hamas out in the open. But I think what's important here, and I've been reading the reports all day, that the Israeli airstrike has shattered the ceasefire. I think it's important to understand the ceasefire ended on March 1st, and we have essentially given them almost 3 weeks of non-fire, essentially a ceasefire, in order to get an opportunity to get more of the hostages out. And instead, not only have they dug in and played all sorts of games, which surprises me not at all, but they've also used the period from the beginning of the ceasefire, plus these almost 3 weeks, to recruit more terrorists. Their numbers, according to our estimates, are back up to around 20,000, which means that they've replaced about half of those that we've killed. Not on the same quality, obviously, but numerically, we're dealing with people with guns. Booby trapping, mining, tripwiring, opening tunnels, producing more rockets. In other words, not surprisingly, again, we knew this was going to happen. They used the ceasefire to build themselves back up to some semblance of military capability. And our information was that they were also planning attacks. In other words, another shot at October 7th. Wow. They've said outright that October 7th was the first of many, and they mean it.
So what if Hamas just doesn't come back to the negotiating table? What will the IDF do next?
We'll continue to escalate.